Hello, and welcome to the Johnson Controls Blue Water webinar for July 2022. The Blue Water webinar is brought to you by the Water Infrastructure Technology team of Johnson Controls. We have a very special webinar for you this month. We know that many of you are deep into the budget planning cycle, and you may be wondering exactly how your utility will obtain the funds it needs to make those necessary infrastructure improvements. To help with those funding sources, we have brought the experts to you in our webinar this month. We will introduce our two special guests, Ben Speed and Liz Charewicz, to you in just a moment, but I would first like to introduce myself and two of my wonderful teammates, Audrey Noel and Jonathan Gunn. I am Craig Hanna, and I am truly blessed to serve as the engineering manager of this wonderful team. I have been designing projects that reduce both real and apparent water loss, that increase staff efficiency, and that decrease operational and maintenance expenditures for water utilities for the past 20 years. Audrey Noel leads our team from sunny Southern California, and she is both a whiz at databases and a truly top-notch project manager. Audrey, would you please tell us more about yourself and how you serve our industry?
Absolutely. Thank you, Craig. I'm Audrey Noel, and I'm the Business Development Leader for the Water Infrastructure Technology team here at Johnson Controls. I have 7 years of industry experience and decades of experience in operations. And while I serve this team from the West Coast, Jonathan Gunn serves our team on the East Coast as project manager. Jonathan?
Yeah, thank you, Audrey. So my name is Jonathan Gunn. I have the privilege of serving as a market manager for the water infrastructure team. I have 12 years in the industry, and like Craig, I've developed a number of projects over the years and currently serve with the American Water Works Association in a number of different capacities, including as the current chair of the Customer Metering Practices Committee and a co-author of a number of manuals and publications. So appreciate you being here with us this morning. And as always, before we dive in, for the folks that may be new to the webinar or maybe have not been with us for a couple months. We do have a relatively new layout here, a couple months old. So, as always, the main window here you'll see, and you should see some orange dots coming up on your screen as I go through, is the main slide deck. So that's where a majority of the action is going to happen. You'll see the slides as we progress through the webinar, and you'll see some poll questions pop up there as well. To the left, you have the media player. That's where you're currently seeing my video feed, and you'll see the feed of the other presenters as we progress through the webinar this morning. Below that, you have webinar-related content. This is something that we will be referring to a number of times throughout the webinar. This is supplemental information about things that we will be discussing today, and you can download those at your leisure and read them and get some finer details on things that we're discussing this morning. Next to that, you have the audience chat. So this is a chat function so you can communicate with your fellow audience members, something new that in the last few months here. But if you want to reach the presenters, we can't see that audience chat. So if you want to talk to us, right next door to it is the Q&A function. So if you have any questions for the presenters during the webinar, please submit those through the Q&A box. If you feel that Q&A just won't do it and you want to have a one-on-one with us and really expand upon your idea and get some in-depth discussion going, you have two ways of doing that. One is the email function up here to the top right. Send us an email either through that or something else you hear a few times here is the bluewater@jci.com. That is our email. Below that, you can also book a meeting. So you can schedule a conversation with us directly and get something on our calendars. Last but not least, you have the icon bar at the bottom of the page. A lot of these, some of these are redundant here. So as I've mentioned before, all of these windows that I just went through, you can move them around, you can resize them, you can really make this experience your own. If in doing so, you happen to accidentally get rid of one of those, just go down to that icon bar and you can bring it right back. There are also some other tools down there that are not currently shown, such as earning CEU credits. You are eligible to earn your continuing education from this webinar, and taking a survey. That's something that we always ask when we're done, that you take a survey for us and let us know how we did, things that you like, things that you didn't like, and we're always looking to improve the webinar series. So with that, Craig, I'll hand it back over to you, and you can set us up for this morning.
All right, thank you, Jonathan. And I'll be glad to do that. We have two very special guests with us today to discuss funding and financing water and wastewater infrastructure projects. Ben Speed is the Vice President for Global Financing for Johnson Controls, and Liz Charewicz is the Grant Administrator for Johnson Controls. Ben will be presenting infrastructure and funding solutions, and Liz will be discussing the grant writing process. This is your webinar, and we will gladly pause to take your questions throughout the event. And speaking of questions, if you've been attending the webinars for any time now, you should know that Audrey, Jonathan, and I love anything to do with potable water and water metering and reducing water loss, but the three of us are also passionate about anything pertaining to flight. And today is the anniversary of a very special day in aviation, and to start the webinar, we thought we'd have a little fun and have a trivia question for you. And that is, what famous event in aviation history occurred on this day in 1969? Was it the first flight of the Boeing 747? Was it the first flight of the Concorde? Did the Apollo 11 lunar module successfully land on the surface of the moon? Or did Dan Cooper, better known as D.B. Cooper, hijack Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305 and then later free fall from this Boeing 727 into history? We'll give you a few seconds to answer that question. I never realized how busy 1969 was for aviation. It was a really exciting year. All right, well, let's see what the answer is. And the correct answer is that today is the 53rd anniversary of when Neil Armstrong and Edwin Buzz Aldrin landed on the surface of the moon in the Apollo 11 lunar module. And congratulations to all of you who answered that question correctly. If you chose the first flight of the Boeing 747, which is an event that also changed the world, that occurred on February 9th, 1969, just 4 short days of when I was born. And the first flight of the Concorde occurred only 3 weeks later on March 2nd. And then lastly, the mysterious Dan Cooper, or D.B. Cooper, as he has come to be known, hijacked that Boeing 727 and then parachuted into history on November 24th, 1971, which was Thanksgiving Eve. And if you happen to ever have any contact with Dan Cooper, please let us know by sending us an email at bluewater@jci.com. And now I am very pleased to welcome Mr. Ben Speed to our webinar. Ben is the Vice President of Global Financing for Johnson Controls. And Ben, please share with us how we can fund these water and wastewater infrastructure improvement projects.
Yep, thanks, Craig. I appreciate it. I appreciate the introduction. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining our webinar today. I'm Ben Speed, Vice President for Global Structured Finance for Johnson Controls. Our captive finance business, JC Capital, is effectively responsible for funding a variety of different infrastructure projects using some different structures. We're going to get into that a little bit today. Before I give you all the full background, and just a couple of comments about what we're seeing in financial markets today. Obviously, it is a very tumultuous time in our financial markets, both in the United States and globally. We continue to see a healthy economic growth within our, as judged by our GDP. So we're constantly seeing, as we come out of the pandemic, continued demand from both commercial enterprises, government, and from the consumer, albeit with sort of the looming horizon of expectations around recession. A lot of that is forecasted out to start dialing back our GDP growth over the next few months. Most economists that have been polled out there are forecasting about a 40% chance of a recession from our robust GDP growth that we've seen in the last year. So while it's been a fairly profitable and lucrative year for a lot of organizations out there, there are some concerns about what's happening in the future. Economically, and this directly pertains to some of our infrastructure projects that we're seeing out there, supply chain continues to be the biggest hurdle to economic growth. The availability of supplies and the timing on when that availability will come to the project sites is having a direct impact on the affordability of these projects. There's also labor force shortages, so we continue to see a lack of labor that is impacting both the delivery of these projects as well as the cost of projects. Now, with all of those headwinds, there is an expectation economically that there will be some issues around unemployment that will have a direct impact not only on the projects but on local economies. All of this has had a direct impact on inflation, which is probably the biggest, most important word that we're hearing in economic circles today. The Federal Reserve, as everyone knows, has been attempting to raise interest rates as a way to reduce that inflation. On a broad scale, we're seeing 8% inflation year over year each month since this past December. That's when you look at a basket of goods across the economy, we're seeing in certain locations the price of goods for particular pieces of equipment be as high as 20%, some being slightly lower. But obviously, price increases are a big deal. And that's where financing really comes into play. We're forced to really get creative in how we're funding infrastructure projects. We know that prices continue to rise. We know that because of the labor and supply chain issues that projects are taking a little bit longer and they're more expensive. What that means is that you get a gap between what is budgeted and what the ultimate price is for those projects. And that forces us to be just more creative with our financing, which we're going to talk about today. I will tell you that there is a lot of creativity out there, and the world continues to be awash in capital. Despite the fact that the Federal Reserve raising interest rates, there still is plenty of sources of capital, both in the traditional debt markets for public finance, as well as for alternative structures out there, which we'll talk about here shortly. So just a little bit of background on Johnson Controls. I think you all know us from our products and our projects and our services. From a funding perspective, we've been in the capital market business for a long time. While the company's been around for over 130 years, we've been funding projects really since the 1980s. In the last 10 years, we've financed about $4 billion worth of infrastructure. Most of that has been focused in the public sector. So when we're talking about energy efficiency projects, when we're talking about infrastructure improvements, performance contracting, public-private partnerships, we've done all of that in the last 10 years in up to $4 billion worth of work. So pretty active in the finance market. We work in both balance sheet lending. So for the public finance standpoint, that would be looking at things like general obligation bonds, revenue bonds, but we've also done plenty of asset-based financing where we're tying obligations to the performance of those projects and those pieces of equipment. We've seen projects as small as $100,000. We've seen other infrastructure projects in the $200 or $300 million size. So quite a range out there. Small communities, large municipalities, state projects, county projects, all sorts of local government entities that are out there trying to take advantage of what still remains to be a low cost of capital that makes these projects affordable and to be able to make that necessary investment into their infrastructure. So it's still a very good time to be financing projects despite all the turmoil going on in financial markets. When I talk about the different projects that touch water, we really cover the full spectrum. So all the way from the sources and the treatment facilities through the pipes and pumps for distribution to the consumption at the end user, and then obviously as we recirculate that water back to our facilities through wastewater treatment and through stormwater treatment. There are opportunities there for you to not only make smart investments in the infrastructure, but also to be able to capture financial benefits, whether that's revenue generation or it's loss prevention or being able to monetize other revenue streams that you may not be aware of that are out there. So when I think about all the different financing structures that are out there, there's probably a dozen of different tools that are out there, which is great. It means more options for local governments to be able to manage their water projects. But it can also get very complicated. There can be a lot of noise, and it's hard to differentiate between one program versus another. So what I've tried to do is simplify this a little bit. I really kind of boil the structures down to two questions. That's of ownership and risk. So when we talk about all the different structures that are out there, from a very basic to across the spectrum to the more alternative, I still just keep those two questions in mind. Does the municipality want to actually own the infrastructure, or do they want a third party to own it? And do they want to manage their own risk, or do they want to transfer that risk to a third party? So those two questions alone will simplify a lot of the questions that you have out there. In the top right corner, we'll sort of focus up there at your 1 o'clock level. So this is where you have your standard risk as well as your municipal owned infrastructure. This is your traditional revenue bond or your traditional GO bond, the type of traditional debt financing that most municipalities have seen. But with that, we also have all these other options. We've got performance-based financing. This is where the city is going to own these assets, but they're looking to transfer risk. We've got infrastructure as a service. I think many of you have probably heard this phrase used time and time again out in the marketplace, from software to energy to infrastructure. This is an arrangement where you don't actually have to own the assets, but instead you're able to transfer the ownership and the performance to a third party. And then we have, service-based arrangements where maybe you're looking to manage technology that may need to be replaced and upgraded throughout its life cycle over a multi-period contract. So we've got arrangements that fall into that quadrant. But again, just as a reminder, I just always kind of come back to ownership and risk management as sort of my guiding two questions as I look at those structures. So I want to pause for a moment. There's some really high level topics there, but I just want to see if anyone out there has questions about those different programs. Okay,
yeah, Ben,
go ahead.
So I was just saying, there's one here. It's in order to minimize the impact on my budget, I would like to extend the term as far as possible. What's the maximum term that's available on something like that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we're going to get into that as we dive into the details of these programs. I will tell you that from a lending standpoint, we always look at the different structures based on the life of the asset. So it really depends on the type of equipment, the type of infrastructure that we're working with. If we're talking about a treatment plant, you've got some heavy mechanical equipment in there that's probably going to have a 20+ year useful life. So you'll see a lot of financing go out that far. For other assets, higher technology things that will need to be refreshed quite regularly, you're going to see shorter term financing, maybe in sort of the 10 to 15 year range. I will say that the one variable to all that is the public-private partnership. So through those contracting tools, we are able to manage the life cycle of technology. So even if you have an asset that maybe is 15 or 20 years in life, we're able to do financings out 30 or 40 years. We're able to accomplish that by pairing that financing with a long-term operations and maintenance contract where we replace some of that shorter life equipment several times over throughout the amortization term. So you're effectively able to not only manage the first cost for the installation, but you're able to manage the life cycle cost as you replace that equipment over time. So it really depends on the life of the asset and the nature of that O&M contract. Okay, great. So good question. Let's dive a little bit closer into the details here. So I told you about the 4 quadrants here. I want to give you a couple of examples of the types of financing structures that we're seeing within those programs. So again, we're going to go back up to the top right. This is the place where everyone goes running home to, because it's what most cities know is their common tool for financing infrastructure. This is your general obligation bond, which is a tax-backed obligation. You have your revenue bonds, which are supported by the revenues from water and sewer fees and other revenue streams, not necessarily tax-backed, but supported by a dedicated revenue stream coming in from that additional payment of the water and sewer fees. And then the third bullet in here is the lease purchase. So this is actually a tool that we really like seeing in the marketplace. When we see a 20-year lease purchase that customers use, it really is a 1-year lease purchase with 19 renewals, all subject to budget appropriation. Now, the reason why we like this program is because there's no tax pledge like you see in a GO bond, and there's no revenue pledge like you see in a revenue bond. So it's effectively just paid out of the operating budget of the city or the municipality or county that's the borrowing entity. So even though it's a very traditional financing tool for public finance, it is a little bit friendlier in terms of taxes or revenues that may already be obligated to other debts. So with that, we're going to move to the left, so top left quadrant there, and talk about performance financing. So contingent payment performance contract is an alternative program that we've been seeing quite a bit. Johnson Controls has actually done about 20 of these transactions in the U.S. They are really designed around transferring the payment risk over to your contractor, your vendor like Johnson Controls. So if you think of your traditional debt financing, your bondholders or your bank lenders are going to expect a payment on a specific date at a specific amount, regardless of the performance of the project. In performance financing, you really you peg the payment to the performance of the asset. So for a contingent payment program, that might be a performance contract where the equipment needs to obtain a certain amount of efficiency or a certain amount of operational benefits, and that's measured and verified each year. And if you don't receive those benefits, then you get to reduce your payments. So in other words, that obligation is quote unquote contingent instead of being unconditional. The other option out there is the P3 contract, which I talked a little bit about before. And that's really pegged to other performance KPIs like availability. So there may be a particular asset that you will say, okay, I have a predictable installment purchase arrangement. I still want to own these assets, but I'm not so certain about my commitment to the financing. So I'd rather transfer the risk over to the vendor or contractor to make sure that my payments are pegged to whether or not that equipment continues to work and perform as expected. So both of those are performance-based payments so that you can get away from your unconditional obligation. And then moving down from there are the off-balance sheet programs. Now, I will tell you that off-balance sheet is kind of like the Loch Ness Monster. Everyone's heard of it, but few people have seen it. It is a very difficult status to get to from an accounting standpoint. There are some programs out there like infrastructure as a service where you don't actually own the assets, but someone like Johnson Controls or another vendor or contractor continues to own that asset once it's installed, and the payments are variable based on the performance. You see the same type of thing with solar power purchase agreements. So a lot of facilities out there where you may be using some of your additional land that's available where you can locate a solar array, and you buy electricity off of that solar array on a variable basis depending on how much electricity is produced. Contracts like that have been able to get that service contract status. And then, of course, you have your wastewater and renewable gas projects. This is where similar type of arrangement where the city doesn't actually own the infrastructure, but instead your private partner comes in, invests in the infrastructure, installs the plant, installs the right type of infrastructure to be able to capture things like methane and other waste products, and they're able to clean that up through an industrial process and convert it over to some type of renewable energy like renewable gas, and be able to capture the revenues by selling off those products. Those are considered off-balance sheet programs from an accounting standpoint, because again, the city doesn't end up owning those assets. You still can benefit from those programs. There are opportunities for revenue sharing whenever we're doing those types of projects and we're selling off the renewable natural gas or any of the other byproducts. So there is opportunity and upside for the city, in addition to being a sponsor for an environmental and sustainable project. And then lastly, our bundled services. That's in our bottom right quadrant there. And really this focuses on technology. So when you think of the types of assets that are having a very steep evolutionary curve in terms of technological advancements, you don't necessarily want to go out and own those because it's expensive from a first cost standpoint. And then you're going to know that in 5 or 10 years, that technology may be obsolete. So rather than have to invest in those products, you're able to enter into these bundled services contracts where we can come back and we can refresh that technology at periodic times based on the advancements of those technologies. The best example I have to this is your cell phone, your mobile phone. So probably a high-tech service. You love all the gadgets that come with your phone today, but in 2 years it'll be a dinosaur. So thinking about the right way to be able to manage the budget around paying for those high-tech assets. So we've given you a lot of detail there. I want to pause and just see if there's any particular questions about any of those programs.
And if you have any questions, please enter them into the Q&A module on your console.
Yep, and make sure to use the Q&A and not the audience chat, just in case, to make sure you're getting it in the right window there.
All right, very good. The last thing I want to do here before we transition is just to talk about some specific assets and how those projects have been funded. Water meters are one of the most popular ways for us to improve the infrastructure within a community and to have a direct benefit on not only the infrastructure, but on the operational efficiency, the operational performance, and to also be able to save the municipality revenue. It's really a revenue enhancement play. There's so much water flowing through our different off-takers here that is not being accounted for. And so being able to come in and use either a traditional debt financing tool or one of our alternative programs like the contingent payment performance contract or the bundled services agreement is a great way to pay for this infrastructure and to be able to enhance the revenues of the city to make sure that everyone is paying their fair share for the amount of utility services that they've been using. Leak detection is another popular program. This is something that's really traditionally used through your revenue bonds or your lease purchase programs, and really designed around coming into those distribution pipes that are running throughout our municipalities, ensuring that the valuable product, which is the water, is not being lost, and that ultimately is leading to lost revenue. So coming in and being able to do patches and replacements on that distribution system and paid for through your traditional public finance mechanisms. Treatment plants. Treatment plants are obviously a place of high energy consumption. They also have quickly deteriorating assets because of the operational environment that they sit in. There's always opportunities there to replace particular pieces of equipment to improve energy efficiency. That's going to reduce your utility spend. It's also going to preserve the life of the asset, as well as reduce the amount of maintenance spend that the municipality is going to have. And we really see all forms of financing when you come to those treatment plants, whether it's individual pieces of equipment. We've seen small projects and we've also seen large-scale retrofits or expansions of capacity using the different financing tools that we discussed before. And then lastly, the wastewater conversion to renewable natural gas. This is something that I think is probably the highest growth item, meaning that we're starting to see more and more adoption of these programs. There's plenty of municipalities out there that are either not aware of or just not sure how to execute a project to be able to capture all of these waste byproducts, whether that's the methane gas or any other byproducts, where we're able to capture what was previously seen as a waste item, and we're able to apply that industrial process, convert it into something that is clean, renewable, and marketable, and then be able to transport and sell that product off into the marketplace, or to use to fuel other utility services that are part of the municipality. So great program, starting to see huge advancements in that technology, starting to see widespread adoption of those programs. The great part is that companies like Johnson Controls are able to really deliver a turnkey solution, so that for those municipalities that aren't necessarily sure how to manage the project, the design, the construction, the operations, and then most importantly, take that risk on the payback of that investment by converting that into renewable natural gas and being able to sell it off. That's something that companies like Johnson Controls are able to do. Maybe a little bit more risk than what a municipality may be used to doing. So bringing in a credit-worthy partner that has the balance sheet to be able to make an investment in that and take the performance risk is something that's really advantageous. So with that, I think we're going to wrap up everything related to financing, and it's going to create an opportunity. If we have any further questions, we'll be able to transition over into the rest of the presentation.
Yes, again, please use your Q&A module to enter any questions you may have for Ben. And Ben, we do have a question here from the audience. Why would a city choose anything other than the cheapest interest rate when selecting finance options?
Yeah, I get that question a lot of times. We come in and we talk about the menu of different options out there, and it's a lot of information. Again, we tried to simplify down to risk and ownership. And I think it comes back to those two questions. So someone would say, listen, we just issue revenue bonds. It's what we do. It's what we've always done. And that's great. If your number one buying criteria is cost, then you're going to get the lowest possible interest rate going through a traditional revenue bond or a GO bond. It's kind of like, transportation. If my biggest issue or buying criteria on transportation is cost, I'd buy a bicycle and not a car. There may be other things that influence your buying criteria, like whether or not you want to own these assets. Do you need to own these assets? Do you have the operational excellence to be able to manage those assets? And then secondly is on risk, especially as we move into some of these more newer markets, like the renewable natural gas programs, like the technology management and the life cycle refresh programs. Those are great examples where it may make more sense to use private capital to be able to fund that, knowing that it's going to be more expensive than traditional tax-exempt financing, but you're able to transfer over all of the risks that come with that, from the design, engineering, construction, operations, and then managing the market volatility of the products that come out of those projects. That's really where it comes down to. Do you want the cheapest type of financing, or do you want to manage your risk in an appropriate manner? So I always come back to that to answer your question. Do I want to own these assets, and do I want to manage the risk on these assets?
Okay. And Ben, we have another question from the audience, and that is, how much more could an IaaS cost a community for something like metering AMI as a percentage?
Yeah, so right now we're probably seeing Tax exempt rates, if I were to do a lease purchase to go do a water meter replacement, we're probably seeing those on a 20-year basis somewhere around 3% to 3.25% based on current market conditions and accounting for differences in credit quality. If you were to do an infrastructure as a service program, you're probably looking at something closer to 5 or 6% today. So it is quite a difference in the cost of capital. What do you get with that? Well, that's where you get into the whole ownership and risk and accounting treatment and being able to manage it through an outside party.
Okay, and we'll give a few more seconds. If anybody has any other questions for Ben, we'll be glad to take them right now. Just use your Q&A module. And if you're anything like me, you always think of questions to ask after the event is over. So if you're like me and that happens to you, just please send an email to bluewater@jci.com, and we will forward it to Ben and get his response to you very promptly.
Great, Craig. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ben, we truly appreciate the excellent information that you shared with us. And I would now like to introduce Liz Charewicz, the Grant Administrator for Johnson Controls. Liz is going to tell us how we can obtain those critical grants that we need to make those necessary improvements to our water distribution and wastewater collection systems. And Liz wanted to start her presentation with a true or false question for you. And so the question Liz wants to know is, true or false? Grants are free money. If you'll respond, let's see what you think. Oh, went too far. Okay, Liz, it looks like we have a 50-50 split. What is the correct answer?
The correct answer is false. As my mom always told me, nothing in life is free. As exciting as much as I love grants, I always say that they're not necessarily free money because there's deliverables involved and strings attached. I know we have a lot of public entities on here today. As you know, a lot of grants funded projects require cash match, and I'm really pleased to be able to present alongside Ben today because in some cases you can use financing a lot of cases you can use financing to pay for cash match. So that's why I say grants are not free money because they still require your organization to put forth time and resources to get the job done. All right. So thank you for your introduction, Craig. I want to start out by talking about our program at Johnson Controls. And you might think, Johnson Controls, why do they have a grant services program? And I will say that we really are here to help you offset your project costs through alternative funding, mainly government grants. Before coming to Johnson Controls, I worked in nonprofit for over a decade. And I'll tell you, as a grant writer working in the nonprofit sector and with government entities, coming to Johnson Controls, it makes my job a lot easier because we have access to people like Ben. We have technical experts, graphic designers. We have a wealth of resources to take grant applications to the next level. So with that said, our team has a 91% win rate. And I think a lot of that is attributed to the fact that we have a lot of resources, but we also are in a position to qualify opportunities with you, our customers, in advance. So we don't take it lightly when a customer asks us for help. We really want to make sure we have things covered in partnership with you. So I'll go into detail with our grant writing and grant seeking process in a little bit, but I want you to know that we understand your time and budgets are stretched. we want to come in and work collaboratively with you so that the grant writing process is not so stressful. Our team has been able to help secure over $600 million in grants over the past 10 years. Again, that comes to having a process and being able to work with organizations like yourselves to win. I say that we have a 100% return on investment. So let's say you're in the 9% of grants that don't necessarily win the proposal, but each document that we support has, that's your intellectual property. So you own that. We don't circulate your proposal to other entities and groups. So let's say if you don't win, you can still use that for other opportunities. But if you do win, guaranteed you're going to get your return on your investment. We pride ourselves on customer satisfaction. That's the best part of our job. Is we also have sustained a 4.9 out of 5 stars rating over the past 10 years. Okay, so we really, our goal is to understand your needs and come up with a plan that's perfectly aligned to make funding as low stress as possible. I have a quote from all my customers are a favorite, but one of our longtime customers, when I first met them, said, listen, we've applied for state grants year after year. We can't, there must be some, I don't know what's going on. Maybe we're too small of an organization to get competitive funding. I said, let us just have the chance to work with you, and maybe we can identify ways to help bring your proposal to the next level. And sure enough, we won the proposal. And I'll say that it's not because we really just, as a coming in with a fresh set of eyes, were able to document and hone in on what their vision and mission was and make sure that the grant scope aligned with that. So sometimes I just want to let you know, we can come in and enhance what you're already doing. And I'll say that we write grants for this customer for JCI scope on a regular basis, and they've been a customer for ours consistently for 5 years now. Okay, so we're going to head into another true or false question. Craig, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll read the question. True or false? Competitive grant money is traditionally designed to address an organization's cash flow problems. Tell us what you think.
Okay.
Oh. It looks like everyone's in agreement, Liz. It looks like they believe that's a false statement.
You all are correct, and we're on the same page here. And I'm impressed because sometimes we get a lot of truths on that one. Grants are really meant traditionally to not support operations and maintenance type of costs. Their funding sources have priorities, and they don't have the resources or staff to implement them. So they put out a call for proposals, and they're asking for organizations like yours to implement that work. So it's really a lot of times innovation, enhancing your services. And I'll tell you that with our team, we've worked with, especially focusing on water meters, which might not be, for me, of course, they're great because they're saving water, helping generate revenue. But from the government standpoint, they're not always the most glamorous thing to fund. But if we've been able to link in more innovation into the water meters with software to track leak detection, and also tie in infiltration ponds or stormwater management to make your project more appealing, but also based upon your local needs. So we want to say that grants, like I was saying earlier, there's strings attached. It's not as clean as just perhaps going to the bank and things like that. Okay, so you'll hear me say a lot today about team collaboration. Our group really is here to enhance the great work that you already are doing. Like I was mentioning, the customer earlier, they're in Pennsylvania, and they do fantastic work. It was actually a security project but they just needed someone to come in and help document what they were doing. So I want you to know that our team understands that you are the expert. We're just here to help your team take some of the burden off of you. So we are here to identify funding. We understand that you probably are familiar with some of the traditional grants, but we always work with you to say, okay, what are some of your water conservation goals and needs? What are all your pain points? And we can do a search to make sure we're leaving no stone unturned. We know that a lot of municipalities and water districts have in-house grant writers, and we certainly do not want to ever overstep with them. In some cases, we will provide budgetary information and schedule and an implementation plan, not necessarily as much with the narrative, but in some cases, I'd say in most cases, we end up providing the full service. So we can scale up or scale back depending upon your needs. And we'll cover the grant writing process in a moment, but I want you to know that we can help identify funding, apply for funding, and then also once you win the grant, we always like to reconvene so we can go over all the compliance or reporting compliance. As you may know, when you apply for a grant, you might not even find out if you win it for up to a year or so later. So it's a really good idea to take that contract. Let's go over everything that we said we would do and make sure everybody's on the same page so that you're well positioned to deliver on your grant and hopefully apply for additional funding to that source in the future. So again, it's a team sport. I always tell customers that we can Google with the best of them, but we really like the most successful grants and compelling proposals are ones where we are able to work with your subject matter experts and points of contact to get an authentic and realistic picture of where you are and where you want to go with that grant project. I don't mean to say that to overwhelm you. We streamline the process so that we'll tell you exactly what we need. We'll get it all on the table so that we take a lot of the guesswork. So I just want to say that it is definitely a collaborative thing. So as I said, we identify, apply, and help. We can help with the grant management, but we rely upon your organization. Oftentimes we'll work with anyone ranging from the sustainability officer to the CFO to program managers. With different things ranging from the budget to getting letters of support and things like that, but we try to make it as easy as possible. And how do we do that? Is we have a pretty robust project management plan. So we start out with qualifying the opportunity. So do all the executive levels of the organization or the town council or whoever it is, board, do they have buy-in for this project? Then who are the subject matter experts? Is everybody on the same page? Do you have the funding? Do you have the financing in place? All right, we got the green light. So then our team would move into outlining the responsibility matrix, which is we depending upon your needs, we oftentimes own that. So that I would say to you, hey, we need to get XYZ information and these inputs by the end of this week. I usually set up an interview with the customer and we can knock out those key inputs over the phone. Most customers prefer to be interviewed so they're not having to burn the midnight oil and sit at their computer all evening, things like that. Or in some cases, they will send bullet points. So we really like to understand your preferred communication and make it as easy as possible. And we also, as part of the grant writing process, we outline the evaluation criteria so that we have a strategy for each of the sections and we get all our messaging in there. And like I said earlier, you own that document. So we sometimes, a couple of years ago, we helped over 20 customers at the same time apply for the same grant. And each of those proposals had a different spin or different story of why they needed it. believe that every organization has their own needs, their own mission and values. And we really want to make sure we drive it home to the funding source to convey why that customer needs it now and why they're going to succeed. So we are very passionate about what we do. One thing I want to say too is we understand that your team is very busy, and I like to avoid surprises at all costs. So on our kickoff call, once we get a green light on the grant, we block up time on everybody's calendars for review and also to submit the grant. We'll set up weekly status meetings depending upon deadlines and what is due or what is required for that grant. But we also block off your leadership calendar so that they can be on the phone and approve and we walk you through the grant submission process. So we'll type up instructions and we go over it over the phone with you at that time. So we really like to take the legwork off. Okay. So I want to also talk about, okay, this all sounds great and wonderful, but what actually is out there for water funding? We focused on the infrastructure bill because I know that's the big thing that's available or coming in other opportunities coming up in the future. And as you notice, there's funding sources on here that have been around for a while, but they have additional funds through the infrastructure bill. But I want everybody to know that we have experience with the EPA drinking water and clean water funds, and also the Bureau of Reclamation. And our role varies with all those. So with the SRF, or state revolving funds, our role really is we're working more with the engineering team at Johnson Controls and our finance group and your finance team to populate the documents and make sure that things get done on time. As you know, those processes can be very cumbersome. So our job is really to help manage the deadlines and communicate to your team and with our team to make sure everything gets across the finish line and you're on the up and up. Bureau of Reclamation, we've had success with those three opportunities. We've had success in California and Colorado, because as you know, more Western states have drought issues, and that's where we've landed a lot of the time. And we also understand that connecting with the funding source up front can be very helpful, especially with the Bureau of Reclamation. So we helped the city of Trinidad in Colorado get a Water Smart grant, and we met with the Bureau of Reclamation a couple times because we wanted to make sure that we were applying for a scope on behalf of that customer that fit their authentic needs and also was aligned with the Bureau of Reclamation. So it was a win-win, and we were successful with that. So we just like to leave no stone unturned. I'm very excited that Johnson Controls is getting more into more water conservation services such as stormwater management. So that is a program I have not gone through. However, we do have experience with stormwater water management, especially in Canada. So I'm excited to use our process for that program as well. And one thing I do want to mention with grant opportunities is timing is everything. So when I meet with our sales teams and external customers, I sound like a broke record. Timing. We always want to know what the scope and the budget is, at least high level, so that we can document and capture what exactly it is you are aiming to do. So it's never too early to plan for grant writing, and especially to have a clear understanding of what your prioritized needs are so that we can help you succeed. So now we have one
last question for you, and that is, where can you go to learn more about federal grant opportunities? So which of those resources is the best source for you to learn about that? Free money, right, Liz? Free money?
Yes. No free money, Craig.
All right, let's see what the audience says. And it looks like all of the above.
We have a really sharp group here. Absolutely. So I'm guessing you all are familiar with these various sites, but just in case, just so you know, build.gov, Building a Better America, that's the hub for all the infrastructure funding. And the government has made it as, I don't like to use the word easy, but as streamlined as possible. So check that website, bookmark it. There's an Excel sortable way to view all the infrastructure opportunities. And then there's also a PDF that gets updated regularly. So check that out. Grants.gov is the clearinghouse for all grants. Remember, it's a database updated by humans. So you want to make sure that when you're looking at grants, you check when was it updated last and qualify. And I always go to the primary source of the federal agency that posted that grant. But that's an excellent go-to. The EERE exchange, the energy.gov, that is the clearinghouse for all grants through the Department of Energy. That's an excellent one. When you go to the home screen, you can see all the grants. A lot of them are more research and development type focus. And then the foundation directory, that focuses on private funding. That can, in my opinion, I feel that private funding can support water projects as an additional value add once you kind of get your meat of the project funded, but it's really kind of the icing on the cake. Okay. So right, I covered a lot there. So does anyone have any questions?
Yeah. If you have any questions for Liz, please use your Q&A module. And we have a question from the audience for Liz. And then we have one question for Ben. And Liz, the question for you is there a fee for the JCI grant help?
Sure. So we are a supportive service to the sales team. So we would always work with the sales team to identify that fee. And I know at the end of the call, there will be contact information to get in touch with the Johnson Controls crew.
All right. And Ben, we have a question for you. And the question is, can you explain risk in more detail with AMI systems that have a 20-year warranty? And isn't the risk low with long-term warranties?
Well, the warranty is going to cover whether or not the product is actually working. What you're looking to, and that comes down to on or off. What you want to be able to manage in terms of risk is the accuracy of those systems. So whether or not those meters are, when they communicate back information about the volume of water that has moved through, you want to make sure that it's been properly metered, that those are being tuned, and that they are properly calibrated, so that just having it on and getting data doesn't necessarily mean that you're getting accurate data. And that's really the management of that risk.
And if I may, Ben, I'll jump on to something you said there as well. One of the things when you're talking about warranties from a technical standpoint, with AMI networks is that, there's a 20-year warranty that's typically prorated for the material, but should you experience a premature failure, typically the labor to actually go out and repair those or replace them or whatever needs to be done is not included in that. So you may get product, but it would still be on the utility to go out and actually take care of the installation and get everything back on track. So that's something where you may look at a situation with Johnson Controls and say, that's some risk that I wanna shift over as well.
Okay. And Liz, we have a question for you. What is the first step to grant seeking?
I think the first step to grant seeking is having a project. And a lot of times, how do you get a project? It's doing some type of assessment and prioritization of needs. So you want to, in your application, you're always going to need to show how did you come up with this offering or solution to be the best way to help the funding source meet their goal. So having those assessments or audits, whichever word you want to use for that, is so critical to getting that grant done. And one more thing on that is I look at grant writing as kind of like an order of operations. With a math problem is you want to have your scope, your schedule, and your budget done. In an ideal world, before you put pen to paper, we realize that's not always realistic, but that's why it's so important to understand your needs and prioritization of them before you start. So I hope that helps.
Okay. And Liz, we have one more question. If our group works with Johnson Controls and uses your grant writing service, how much time will my staff need to dedicate to that process?
Sure. It depends upon the grant application, but overall, I tell customers it can range from anywhere from 10 hours to 20 hours of time. And I say that because, again, it's a team sport, and working together, we're going to really differentiate your story from the pack.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Liz. We appreciate it. We are, if there are any other questions for Liz or for Ben or any of the rest of the team, please submit those through any of the methods we talked about earlier, including webinar or at email, bluewater@jci.com. And just talking about what's coming up in the future here. So we do have another important webinar for you next month, and we hope that you'll attend because it's going to discuss several topics that are becoming ever more important to your utility as communications technology progresses. Chances are you've heard some untrue rumors about smart meters and their effects on public health and safety, as well as concerns about customer data privacy. So our webinar next month, we will discuss those public health, safety issues, and what your utility staff and your account holders need to know about that. We will also discuss customer data privacy and how that data, all that data coming from an AMI system, is kept private and confidential. You also won't want to miss our friends Darcy Burke and Judy Zulfigar from Watermark Associates, as they will discuss ways for your utility to respond when social media turns against you.
So we'd like to thank Ben Speed and Liz Charewicz for joining us today. If you're anything like me and later you think of additional questions, especially about project financing or grants, send your questions to us in an email at bluewater@jci.com, and Ben or Liz will reply promptly to you. We look forward to the webinar next month, and we encourage you to invite your friends and colleagues. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.